It was past midnight when I first heard it, the sound that would change my life forever. A faint, broken sob seeping through the thin walls of my apartment. At first, I thought it was a dream, just the city noise or someone's TV left on too long. But then I heard it again, soft, muffled, aching. A kind of pain that makes your chest tighten even if you don't know the reason behind it. I froze, sitting upright in bed, listening. The sobs came in waves, trembling and desperate, like someone was trying not to be heard but couldn't hold it in anymore. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the power of compassion to heal unseen wounds, then please take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Because this story isn't just about what I heard that night, it's about what it taught me about humanity, love, and how one small act of care can change two lives forever. I had moved into that apartment only 2 weeks earlier. A small, worn-out building on the edge of the city, the kind of place where people kept to themselves. I was 29, single, and working long hours as a freelance photographer barely making ends meet. The walls were thin, the lights flickered sometimes, and the neighbors were just names on mailboxes. Except for the one living next door, apartment 6B. Her name was Clara. I'd seen her once, in the hallway, carrying groceries. She was quiet, with long dark hair tied back loosely, wearing oversized clothes that looked 2 sizes too big. She had smiled politely when I greeted her, but her eyes told a different story, distant, tired, and heavy with something I couldn't name. That night, as I sat there in the dark, listening to her muffled crying, something in me couldn't stay still. I didn't know her. I had no right to interfere. But there was something about that sound, raw and helpless, that felt too human to ignore. So I got up, walked quietly to the wall we shared, and just stood there. Listening. The sobs went on for a while, then turned into soft whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the heartbreak in them. And before I realized it, I whispered softly, "Are you okay?" Of course, she couldn't hear me through the wall. Maybe it was better that way. Because even though she didn't answer, that night marked the beginning of something neither of us expected. The next morning, I saw her again in the hallway. She looked pale, like she hadn't slept. She avoided eye contact, clutching her keys tightly. I wanted to say something, to ask if she was all right, but I hesitated. People like her, I thought, didn't need pity. They needed peace. So I just smiled and stepped aside to let her pass. But that image of her stayed in my mind all day, the hollow sadness in her eyes, the way she looked like she was carrying the weight of something unbearable. Days turned into weeks, and though I didn't hear her cry again for a while, I could tell something wasn't right. I'd hear her pacing late at night. Sometimes the clatter of broken glass. Sometimes complete silence for days, which somehow worried me more. It was like she was living in a world where time had stopped. Then one night, the crying came back, louder, shakier, like her soul was breaking apart. I got up, heart pounding, unsure what to do. But this time, I couldn't just stand there. I stepped out of my apartment and knocked on her door. No answer. I knocked again, gently. I was about to leave when the door opened just a little, and I saw her, eyes red and swollen, face pale, hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered before I could say anything. "Did I wake you?" I shook my head. "No. I just heard you crying. I wanted to make sure you were okay." For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she let out a small, broken laugh that sounded more like pain than humor. "No one's asked me that in a long time." She opened the door wider and stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. Her apartment was dimly lit, half empty. There were unopened boxes in the corner, a few picture frames turned face down on a shelf, and a wilted plant by the window. I noticed a faint scent of lavender candles, the kind people use to hide loneliness. "I'm sorry about the mess," she murmured. "You don't have to be," I replied softly. For the next hour, we sat on her old couch in silence. She didn't talk much, just sipped tea she barely touched, eyes staring into nothing. Eventually, she spoke, hesitantly, like every word was heavy. "My husband, he passed away 8 months ago. I thought moving here might help. But some nights, it all comes back." I didn't know what to say. There's no right thing when someone says that. So I just listened. Sometimes, that's all people need, someone to listen, not to fix. From that night on, something changed. I started checking on her every few days, a knock, a short conversation, sometimes just leaving a cup of coffee at her door. Slowly, she started to smile again. Small at first, but real. We talked about small things, books, movies, the places she used to visit. She told me she used to paint but hadn't touched a brush since her husband died. I encouraged her to start again. "It might help," I said. Weeks passed, and the apartment next door slowly filled with color. I'd see her through the window sometimes, painting by the dim light of a lamp. The gray in her eyes began to fade. She started going out more. Sometimes she'd even knock on my door, bringing homemade soup or cookies she said she accidentally made too much of. It felt good, seeing someone come back to life. And in helping her heal, I didn't realize how much she was healing me too. Because truth be told, I wasn't as fine as I pretended either. I'd been living in my own silence for years, estranged from my family, chasing a dream that felt more like survival than passion. But her presence, her quiet strength, reminded me that even broken people can still bring light to others. Then came the night that changed everything again. It was a stormy Friday, and I was editing photos late into the night when I heard a crash from next door. I rushed over and found her sitting on the floor, crying, the pieces of a broken painting scattered around her. "He loved this one," she said through tears. "I was trying to fix it, but I ruined it." Without thinking, I knelt beside her. "Hey, it's okay. It's just a painting." She shook her head. It's all I had left of him. There was so much pain in her voice it tore something inside me. So I did the only thing I could, I stayed. I helped her clean the mess, then just sat there holding her hand. No words, no advice. Just presence. And slowly, she leaned against me, crying until she couldn't anymore. When she finally looked up, our eyes met. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between us, not love in the romantic sense, but something deeper. Understanding. Healing. A silent promise that neither of us had to face the night alone anymore. After that, life started to find rhythm again. She began teaching art classes for kids at a nearby center. I started landing more photography work. Sometimes, we'd collaborate, she'd paint, I'd capture her work in photos. Our lives, once separate and silent, began to intertwine like two melodies finally finding harmony. A year later, on the anniversary of her husband's passing, she invited me over. There were candles lit, and her newest painting stood in the center of the room. It was a picture of two small apartments side by side, one dark, one filled with light spilling over into the other. Underneath it, she had written, "Because sometimes, healing doesn't knock, it just listens next door." I felt tears sting my eyes as I looked at her. "You've come a long way, Clara." She smiled softly. "We both have." And she was right. That night didn't just change her life. It changed mine too. Because sometimes, the universe doesn't bring people into your world by chance, it sends them when you need to be reminded that compassion still exists, that broken hearts can still beat together, and that even the faintest cry for help deserves to be heard. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that kindness and empathy can truly change lives, please like, comment, and share this video. Let's remind the world that a simple act of care can mean everything to someone who's silently breaking. Before you go, I want to ask you something special. Backhand index pointing right, comment below and tell me, have you ever been someone's light in their darkest moment, or has someone ever been that light for you? I'd love to read your story. Because the night I heard her crying next door, was the night I learned that sometimes, the smallest act of humanity can echo louder than any words ever could. And in a world that often feels cold and distant, maybe, just maybe, we all need to start listening a little closer to the walls next door. It was 2:47 a.m. when I finally decided to leave her hospital room. The faint hum of the ventilator was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. Outside the window, the city lights blinked like dying stars in the distance, mocking me with their careless beauty. I looked at her, so fragile, so still, and for a second, I thought she was gone. Her face looked peaceful, her lips pale, and her hands cold beneath the thin blanket. My chest tightened, and I whispered, "You can rest now, Mom. If you're someone who believes in kindness, forgiveness, or second chances, pause for a moment. Hit that like, comment, share, and subscribe button. Because this story, this one's about how a single night can change everything you thought you knew about love, loss, and what it truly means to stay." My mother, Aisha, had always been the strongest woman I knew. She raised me alone after my father walked out when I was 10. Life wasn't easy. She worked double shifts at a small clinic, made sure I never missed school, and somehow always had a smile when I came home. But cancer doesn't care about strong people. It eats away at them slowly, cruelly, until all that's left are bones wrapped in courage. When the doctors told us she had less than a few weeks, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because denial was easier than acceptance. For the first few days, I stayed by her side every night, pretending things were normal. We'd watch old movies, talk about my childhood, even laugh at memories that used to make us cry. But as the days passed, her words became fewer, her laughter softer, until silence became our new language. Tonight, when I entered the room, she didn't move. The soft rhythm of her breathing seemed to fade with every minute, and I couldn't tell if she was still holding on, or already gone. I stood by the window, staring at the flickering streetlight outside. My mind wandered back to all the times I'd taken her for granted. The time I yelled at her for calling too much when I was in college. The day I missed her birthday because of work. The moment I told her I didn't need her help anymore. All those words, sharp and careless, now echoed like knives in my chest. I whispered an apology she couldn't hear, picked up my jacket, and prepared to leave. Maybe she'd already slipped away while I was lost in guilt. But as I turned toward the door, a faint sound broke through the quiet, a whisper, weak and trembling. "Stay, just until the sun comes up." I froze. For a second, I thought I imagined it. But then her fingers, cold and shaking, brushed against mine. She was awake. Tears welled in my eyes as I turned back to her. She looked so small under the hospital sheets, her eyes half open, glistening with exhaustion. I nodded, unable to speak, and sat back down beside her. The minutes stretched into hours. The night outside deepened, and the sterile white walls of the room seemed to close in. The heart monitor beeped steadily, like a clock counting down moments I didn't want to end. She didn't say much, just held my hand tightly, as if afraid that letting go would mean letting go forever. I told her stories, our stories. The time we got caught in the rain walking home from the market, laughing until our clothes clung to us. The night I got my first job, how proud she was. And the day she told me that being alone didn't make her lonely, that watching me grow was all the company she ever needed. At one point, she smiled faintly and whispered, "You've grown into such a good man, Ayan." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her that whatever goodness I had came from her, but the words stuck somewhere between my heart and my tears. Around 4 a.m., the nurse came in to check her vitals. She looked at me with soft eyes, the kind that understood unspoken pain, and said quietly, "She's stable for now." But I could see the truth in her gaze. Stability was temporary. Time was slipping through our fingers, and no one could stop it. I remembered how she used to sit on our old rooftop when I was little, pointing at the stars. When people we love leave, they don't disappear, she'd tell me. They just move higher up so they can watch over us better. Back then, I thought it was just a comforting lie. Tonight, I wanted it to be true more than anything. She stirred again, eyes fluttering open. Ayan, she said weakly, do you remember that night, when you were 7, and you cried because you thought I wouldn't come back from work? I nodded, my voice trembling. You promised you'd always come back. She smiled faintly. I did, didn't I? Her words hung in the air like a fragile thread between us, thin, but unbreakable. I held her hand tighter, afraid that if I let go, she might drift away. The clock ticked on. 4:30, 4:50. 5:10, each minute felt heavier than the last. The room began to fill with the first light of dawn, a soft orange glow seeping through the blinds. The world outside was waking up while mine felt like it was standing still. She looked at the window, her eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of sunlight. It's beautiful, she whispered. Just like the first morning after you were born. I swallowed hard, remembering the stories she used to tell me about that day. How it had rained all night, how the power went out, how she held me in her arms by candlelight and promised to never let go. And here we were, 28 years later, holding on again, this time, at the edge of goodbye. Then came her final request. When I'm gone, she said softly, don't stop living in this world because I'm not in it. You have to let me go, Ayan. Promise me you'll find your sunlight again. I couldn't speak. My lips quivered, my heart breaking into 1,000 silent pieces. She squeezed my hand one last time and whispered, you've been my greatest reason to stay. The sun was up by then. Light filled the room, gentle and golden, wrapping everything in warmth. And then, just as softly as a sigh, she closed her eyes. The heart monitor went flat. I didn't cry at first. I just sat there, holding her hand, staring at the sunlight she'd wanted to see one last time. It was quiet, too quiet. I don't remember how long I stayed there. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. The nurses came, doctors entered, and people spoke to me, but their voices blurred into static. All I could hear was her last request echoing in my head, stay, just until the sun comes up. It wasn't just a plea for company. It was a metaphor, a mother's final lesson to her son. She didn't want me to stay in grief, but in life. To wait out the dark nights, to believe that morning always comes, no matter how endless the darkness feels. Days passed. Then weeks. I arranged the funeral, went through her things, and returned to the empty house that still smelled like her favorite jasmine tea. I thought grief would fade with time, but it didn't. It only changed form. Some nights, I'd wake up and look at the chair where she used to sit, half expecting her to be there, smiling. Some mornings, I'd make 2 cups of tea out of habit. But then one morning, as the first rays of sunlight slipped through my curtains, I felt something different. The same warmth that filled that hospital room now filled my heart. And in that stillness, I heard her voice again, not in sound, but in feeling, stay, Ayan, until the sun comes up. That day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went back to the old clinic where she used to work and asked if they needed volunteers. The receptionist, an older woman, smiled and said they could always use an extra hand. I started spending my weekends there, helping patients, comforting families, doing small things that made big differences. Somehow, it made me feel closer to her. Every act of kindness felt like a conversation with her spirit. Every smile I gave felt like returning one she'd given me long ago. And for the first time since she left, I didn't feel like I was saying goodbye. I felt like I was finally keeping my promise, to stay, to keep living, to wait for the sunrise. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment, like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of love, loss, and the courage to move forward. Before I end this story, I have one special request. Comment below with a sunrise emoji if you've ever stayed up through the night for someone you love, or if you've learned to wait for your own sunrise after losing them. Because sometimes, life's most painful moments are the ones that teach us the truest meaning of love. I thought she was asleep that night. But what she really gave me was a lifetime lesson, that love doesn't end when the heartbeat does. It lingers in the warmth of the sun, in the quiet strength of memories, and in every choice we make to stay, just until the sun comes up. The night I first met her, the sky was bleeding rain. The storm had torn through our small town with merciless fury, leaving behind broken fences, scattered branches, and power lines hanging like ghosts in the dark. I was standing by my window, clutching a mug of lukewarm coffee, when I saw her, barefoot, drenched, and struggling to drag a heavy box up the driveway of the old house next door. She had just moved in a week ago, though no one had seen much of her. The lights in her house rarely came on, and when they did, they flickered like candlelight behind drawn curtains. Something about her loneliness pulled at me, like the tide calls the shore. Before I knew it, I was outside in the rain, crossing the street. I didn't even have an umbrella, just a stupid instinct to help. She looked up when I called out, her face pale under the streetlight. "Let me help you," I said, and she hesitated, her eyes cautious but tired. I took the box from her trembling hands, carried it inside, and set it down near the couch. That's how it started. I was just a neighbor doing a favor. But that night, though I didn't know it yet, would change everything I thought I knew about kindness, pain, and love. Backhand index pointing right. Before we go deeper into this emotional story, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, because this story is all about that. Her name was Alara. She looked like someone who had forgotten what warmth felt like, the kind of person who smiled out of politeness but never with her eyes. Her house smelled faintly of old books and lavender, the furniture covered in white sheets as though the ghosts of a happier past still lingered there. She thanked me quietly that night, her voice barely a whisper. I could tell she wasn't used to having people around. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing small things. Her lights going out often, her mailbox overflowing, and sometimes, her sitting on the porch steps, staring into nothing. I'd wave, she'd nod back. It became a quiet ritual between us. Then one evening, I saw smoke rising from her backyard. I rushed over, heart pounding, only to find her kneeling beside a small fire pit, burning what looked like letters. Her eyes were wet but steady. She didn't speak, and neither did I. I just stood there, feeling the weight of her silence press against my chest. It was 2 days later when she knocked on my door. Her hands were clutching a small bag of groceries, and she asked, almost apologetically, if I could help her fix her leaky kitchen faucet. It was such a simple request, yet something about the way she asked made it feel like a fragile act of trust. I fixed the faucet, changed a few rusted bolts, and as I was leaving, she said softly, "You're kind, you know that?" I shrugged it off, saying, "Just being a good neighbor." But the truth was, I felt something stir inside me, a strange, protective warmth I couldn't explain. As weeks turned into months, our quiet exchanges grew into something deeper. Sometimes she'd leave a plate of cookies by my door with a note saying, "Thank you." Sometimes I'd mow her lawn without asking. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was two broken souls orbiting each other, afraid to collide. But one night, I found her sitting outside again, this time shivering under the faint light of the porch. I noticed her wrist, a faint bandage wrapped around it. My chest tightened. I didn't ask what happened. Instead, I sat beside her and said, "You don't have to be alone, you know." She looked at me for a long moment before whispering, "Sometimes being alone feels safer." Those words stayed with me for days. Then came the night everything changed. It was late, maybe close to midnight, when I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, Elara stood there, trembling. Her voice cracked as she said, "The lights went out again, and I can't be alone tonight." I let her in. We sat by the dim glow of candles, the storm howling outside just like the night we first met. She stared into the flickering light and said, "You remind me of someone I used to know, someone who used to stay, no matter how broken I was." Her eyes shimmered, full of something between pain and longing. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. She told me about her past, the fiancé who never made it home from a car accident, the parents who moved away, the silence that filled every corner of her life. "I thought I'd forget the sound of his voice someday," she said, "but every time I close my eyes, I still hear him saying he'll be home soon." There was a rawness in her words that cut through me. I realized that sometimes, people don't need you to fix them. They just need someone to stay. As the night stretched on, her head slowly rested on my shoulder. I thought she had fallen asleep. The storm had quieted, and only the soft patter of rain remained. I was about to get up, to let her rest properly on the couch, when she murmured, barely audible, "Stay, just a little longer." Those words, gentle, trembling, almost pleading, broke something inside me. I stayed. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because in that fragile request, I heard the echo of every unspoken fear, every lonely night she had endured. From that night on, I began checking on her more often. We'd share coffee in the mornings, talk about small things, the weather, the birds, her favorite books. Sometimes she'd laugh, and I'd see glimpses of the person she might have been before the world hurt her. It felt good, like watching color slowly return to a faded photograph. But healing isn't a straight path. One morning, I knocked on her door and found it ajar. Inside, the house was quiet, the curtains drawn. I called her name, but there was no response. Panic surged through me. Then I saw her, sitting on the floor, clutching a photo frame, tears streaming down her face. I knelt beside her, and she whispered, "I tried to be okay, but some days, it still hurts too much." I held her hand, not saying anything. Words felt useless. I just stayed, the same way she once asked me to. That's how we spent hours, in silence, sharing the heaviness neither of us could describe. Over time, she began to open up. She started painting again, something she hadn't done since her fiancé's death. Her living room slowly filled with canvases, sunsets, waves, faces half lost in shadow. She once told me, "Every brushstroke is a promise that I'm still here." I realized that's what survival looks like, not the absence of pain, but the courage to create beauty from it. And somehow, without meaning to, I fell in love with her. Not the kind of love that burns fast and bright, but the kind that grows quietly, like ivy finding its way up a broken wall. But I never said it. I didn't want to break the fragile peace she had built for herself. One evening, she invited me for dinner. The table was set with care, candles flickering softly. She smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. "You've been my anchor," she said. "I don't think I'd have made it this far without you." My throat tightened, and I barely managed to whisper, "You're stronger than you think." Then she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine, and said, "Stay a little longer tonight." I did. And that night, something shifted, not into romance, but into a quiet understanding that sometimes, love doesn't need to be confessed. It just needs to be present. Days turned into seasons. We built a rhythm, shared meals, walks at dusk, unspoken comfort. I watched her rediscover life piece by piece. The pain was still there, but she learned to live alongside it. And through it all, I realized something too, that helping her had healed something inside me I didn't even know was broken. Months later, she stood at her door, suitcase by her side. She had decided to move to the coast, to start over and open a small art studio. "I think it's time," she said, her eyes glistening but calm. I helped load her car, and before she got in, she turned to me and smiled softly. "You stayed longer than anyone ever did." "Thank you." I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd miss her, that she changed me, that her kindness had reshaped my heart, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, "You deserve the peace you're chasing." She drove away, and for the first time, the house next door felt truly empty. But I wasn't sad. Because sometimes, love is not about holding on, it's about helping someone find their wings. A few months later, I got a letter. It was from Ilara. Inside was a small photo, a painting of the night we first met in the rain. Beneath it, she had written, "Some people come into your life as a favor, and end up staying in your heart forever." I sat there, staring at the words, tears blurring the page. And I realized, maybe I didn't just help her heal. Maybe she was the reason I finally learned what love truly means, staying, even when you have every reason to leave. Backhand index pointing right. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to comment below what part of Ilara's journey moved you the most. Your support helps more stories like this reach those who need them. Sparkle's special request: comment below with, "I believe in second chances," if you, too, think kindness can change someone's life. And remember, sometimes, the smallest favor can heal the biggest wounds. All it takes, is staying a little longer. The room went silent the moment she entered. Her heel struck the marble floor like thunderclaps, sharp, confident, and unrelenting. Every gaze in the grand conference hall shifted toward her, the woman who could buy entire companies with a single signature, the billionaire no one dared to question. Eleanor Hayes. Her name alone made executives tremble. She was power personified, elegant, ruthless, and unbending. Yet that morning, in front of 200 trembling employees, one man would change everything with 4 simple words: "Ma'am, sit down." Before we dive deeper into this heart-touching story of pride, pain, and redemption, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of standing up for what's right, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Eleanor Hayes had built her empire from ashes. The daughter of a janitor, she had clawed her way through poverty, rejection, and loss. She worked nights, studied days, and never let her emotions show. Over the years, she had learned one brutal lesson: people respected fear, not kindness. So she became the storm everyone feared. By 40, she was one of the richest women in the country, a symbol of discipline, perfection, and impossible standards. But wealth doesn't heal the heart. It only hides the scars. On that stormy Monday morning, Eleanor was launching a new initiative, Project Rebirth. It was meant to reshape her company's image after years of criticism for being too cold, too profit-driven. She stood at the front of the conference room, staring down her employees as if daring them to fail her. Every manager sat frozen, afraid to blink wrong. Her voice sliced through the air like a blade as she demanded reports, numbers, and results. Then, during the presentation, a small mistake appeared on the screen, a spelling error in one of the slides. Her eyes narrowed. "Who approved this?" she asked. Silence. "Who let this slide go through?" In the back row, a man slowly raised his hand. He wasn't wearing a suit. His tie was loosely knotted. His eyes, tired but steady, met hers. "It was me," he said quietly. His name was Daniel Brooks, a single father who had joined the company 3 months earlier as a junior designer. He was a man trying to rebuild his life after tragedy, after losing his wife 2 years ago in an accident that had left him raising his little girl alone. He wasn't used to corporate worlds or billionaires who treated mistakes like crimes. Eleanor's tone turned icy. "You think this company runs on carelessness, Mr. Brooks?" Daniel swallowed hard but didn't look away. "No, ma'am. I think it runs on people." The words were simple, yet they cut through the room like lightning. A murmur rose among the staff, but Eleanor's glare silenced it instantly. She stepped closer to him. People make mistakes. Mistakes cost money. Money costs jobs, she said coldly. Are you ready to take responsibility for every job lost because of your mistake? The air was suffocating. Daniel's jaw tightened. He could have apologized, could have bowed his head like everyone else. But he thought of his daughter, of her smile when he promised her he'd be brave no matter what. So, he took a breath and said something no one in that room ever imagined anyone would say to Eleanor Hayes. "Ma'am," he said softly but firmly, "sit down." The room froze. The sound of a pin drop would have echoed like thunder. For the first time in years, Eleanor looked genuinely shocked. "Excuse me?" Daniel didn't flinch. His voice was calm, not arrogant, just human. "Please, sit down. You've been standing all morning, correcting everyone, pushing us harder than we can breathe. But you haven't looked around, haven't seen how scared everyone is. You built this company, yes, but somewhere along the way, you forgot that people aren't machines. They break, they burn out, they bleed quietly while smiling at you. Please, sit down." Eleanor's hands trembled, almost imperceptibly. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not since her father, long before she became the billionaire. The room stayed silent. Then, something unexpected happened. She sat. Slowly, cautiously, she lowered herself into the chair at the head of the table. And for the first time, she didn't speak. Something inside her cracked open that morning. Memories she had buried beneath layers of success came flooding back, the nights she had studied by candlelight, the days her mother cried because rent was late, and the one promise she had made to herself at 18, "I'll never be weak again." But in her quest to never be weak, she had built walls so high that even her own heart couldn't breathe inside them. After the meeting ended, Eleanor called Daniel to her office. Everyone thought he'd be fired immediately. But when he walked in, she didn't look furious. She looked tired. The kind of tired that goes deeper than the bones. "You realize what you did could cost you your job," she said quietly. He nodded. "I know. But sometimes the truth costs something." Eleanor leaned back, studying him. "You're a single father, aren't you?" He nodded again. "Yes. My daughter's 6. She thinks I design magic instead of marketing slides." For the first time, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at Eleanor's lips. "Magic," she repeated softly. "I used to believe in that once." She paused, her gaze distant. "What happened to you, Mr. Brooks?" "What happened to me?" Daniel sighed. "Life. But it's not about what happens, it's about how we keep going. And sometimes, all people need is a little kindness from those who have the power to give it." Those words lingered long after Daniel left her office. Eleanor stared at the skyline from her glass window that night, the city lights glittering like a million broken dreams. She thought of her employees, the fear in their eyes every time she entered a room. She thought of Daniel's courage, his quiet dignity, and the way he said those words, not to insult her, but to remind her that leadership wasn't about control. It was about connection. The next morning, something extraordinary happened. When the employees gathered again, expecting another storm, Eleanor walked in without her usual sharp heels. She wore flats. Her tone was softer, her expression human. "Before we begin," she said, "I owe someone an apology." Everyone's heads turned as she looked at Daniel. "Yesterday, I forgot that this company doesn't run on perfection, it runs on people like you. You reminded me that power means nothing if it silences hearts." She took a breath, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you, for asking me to sit down." The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was emotional. For the first time, her employees saw not a billionaire, but a woman rediscovering her humanity. Days turned into weeks, and Eleanor began to change the company culture entirely. She created wellness programs, flexible hours for parents, and mentorships for struggling employees. The company thrived, not because of fear, but because of loyalty born from compassion. She also began visiting local community centers, anonymously at first, helping single parents find stable jobs. And somewhere along the line, her connection with Daniel deepened, not romantically at first, but through respect, understanding, and the quiet bond between two broken souls healing in each other's presence. One afternoon, Eleanor visited Daniel's office and found a drawing pinned to his desk, crayon colors, messy handwriting, and a little girl's note that read, "Thank you for helping my daddy smile again." Eleanor stared at it for a long time. Tears she hadn't shed in years found their way down her cheeks. That night, she visited the cemetery for the first time in a decade, kneeling beside her father's grave. "You were right, Dad," she whispered. "Strength isn't about never falling, it's about standing up with a softer heart." Months later, the company hosted an annual gala to honor its employees. This time, instead of delivering a speech full of numbers and projections, Eleanor told a story, about a man who reminded her that leadership was about listening. She ended her speech with a simple truth: sometimes, all it takes to change a life is to ask someone to sit down, and truly listen. The audience stood in applause. Daniel watched from the corner of the room, his daughter sitting on his lap, clapping her small hands with excitement. When Eleanor's eyes met his, she smiled, a genuine, warm smile that carried 1,000 unspoken words of gratitude and respect. From that day forward, "Ma'am, sit down," became a quiet saying among the company staff, a reminder that even the mightiest heart needs moments of humility. And Eleanor never forgot the man who had dared to correct her, not out of rebellion, but out of courage and care. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that even the strongest people need kindness, please like this video, comment below, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories that heal, inspire, and move the soul. Speech balloon special request: before we end, comment below with one line: "Kindness is strength." Let's fill the comments with light and compassion. Because sometimes, it only takes one brave voice, one quiet act of truth, to change even the coldest heart. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It bled through the cracked roof of the old repair shop, dripping into a rusty bucket that sang a slow, lonely rhythm. Inside, beneath the dim light of a single bulb, Daniel sat on the cold concrete floor, knees pulled to his chest, palms blackened with grease and regret. Life hadn't been kind lately. His father's old shop, once alive with laughter, old radios, and the smell of gasoline, was now nothing more than a memory wrapped in dust. He tried to keep it running after his father passed, but the bills came faster than the customers. He had lost his savings, his confidence, and nearly his will to keep going. And that night, when he looked around the emptiness of the place that once held his dreams, he whispered to himself that maybe it was time to close for good. But that was the night she walked in. A woman, soaked to the bone, her trembling hands clutching the doorframe. The sound of her soft voice cut through the storm and the silence like a blade wrapped in silk. She whispered, "I could use a strong hand," and didn't look away. Her eyes, tired yet unyielding, held a story that Daniel couldn't ignore. Something inside him, something buried under years of pain and failure, stirred awake. Before we go deeper into this story, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of helping others when they least expect it, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. These stories come from hearts that still believe in hope. Her name was Clara. Daniel learned that as she stepped inside, shivering, her shoes leaving muddy imprints on the cracked floor. She looked fragile, like a page half-burned yet still clinging to the words written on it. Her car had broken down just outside town, and this was the only light she'd seen for miles. Daniel almost laughed. His was hardly a shop anymore, but instead, he nodded and motioned her inside. He found himself grabbing an old towel, handing it to her, and clearing a space on the counter that had been buried under spare parts. For the first time in months, someone else was there. Someone who didn't just take something from him, but needed something from him. As Daniel worked on her car, he caught glimpses of her through the window. She stood under the awning, arms wrapped around herself, watching the rain fall. Every few seconds, her lips moved like she was whispering something to the night, but he couldn't hear it. It was as if she was talking to the rain itself, pleading, explaining, maybe even forgiving it. When he finally fixed the engine and started it, she smiled, just faintly, but it was enough to light something in him. She reached into her purse to pay, but he shook his head. "It's fine," he muttered. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment, then whispered again, "I could use a strong hand, not just tonight." He didn't understand what she meant. Not then. But that night changed everything. Clara started visiting the shop often. At first, she said it was because her car just made a weird sound again, or that she had nowhere else to wait out the rain. But Daniel could tell she came because she needed the silence he offered, the kind that didn't demand explanations. And he didn't mind. He needed her, too, though he didn't realize it yet. Over time, she'd bring him coffee in the mornings and sit quietly as he worked. He'd tell her about his father, how they built the shop from nothing, how he used to believe fixing things could fix people, too. And sometimes, she'd tell him bits and pieces of her own life. A husband who used to hit her. A home she'd fled from. A family that stopped believing her. Every word she spoke carried weight, and Daniel listened like a man trying to learn a new language, the language of pain unspoken. He never asked her for more than she gave, never pushed her to explain why she stayed in that town with nothing but the clothes she came with. But one evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, she stood by the open garage door and said softly, "Sometimes, people break more than just things, Daniel. And not everything can be fixed with tools." Then she looked at him, her eyes wet, and added, "But maybe you can fix me anyway." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in the same corner where he used to count his failures, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, he didn't think about what he'd lost, he thought about what he might save. Weeks passed. The shop slowly began to change. Clara helped him repaint the walls, dust off the counters, and organize old tools. She'd hum softly as she worked, sometimes laughing when her hands got covered in paint. Her laughter, fragile but real, filled the space that had long forgotten how to echo joy. Neighbors began to notice the lights were on again, and one by one, customers returned. The old place breathed again. But healing is never simple. One afternoon, Clara didn't show up. Daniel waited all day, pacing the floor, checking his phone even though she never called him. When the sun went down, he drove to the bus station. Her bag sat on the bench, but she wasn't there. Panic settled deep in his chest. It wasn't until midnight that she walked back into the shop, her face bruised, her eyes hollow. She didn't need to say anything. He already knew. Her past had found her. Daniel's hands shook as he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She was trembling, whispering apologies as if she had done something wrong. "He found me," she said through broken breaths. "I thought I could run forever." Daniel's heart burned with anger, but he swallowed it. He couldn't change what had happened. All he could do was be the strong hand she once whispered for. For weeks after that, Clara barely spoke. She stayed in the small apartment above the shop, the one Daniel had once used as storage. He'd leave food by her door, never forcing her to come out, just waiting. And slowly, she did. She began to walk around the shop again, fixing small things, sweeping floors, bringing him tea. One evening, as the sun painted the walls orange, she placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "You didn't ask for this, but you stayed anyway." He looked at her then, realizing how her eyes no longer looked for escape, they looked for home. The days turned into months. Together, they built more than a business, they built a rhythm, a quiet companionship that grew roots in their shared silences. Clara found strength in small things, painting, reading, even talking to customers. Daniel found purpose again, in both her presence and his work. And for a while, it felt like maybe life had forgiven them both. But life, as it often does, tested them once more. One night, a storm returned, angrier than before. Daniel was closing the shop when he heard the tires screech outside. A car spun across the wet road, crashing into the ditch. He ran out and froze. The man inside was the same one from the photo Clara kept hidden in her purse. Her husband. He was bleeding, trapped behind the wheel, barely conscious. Daniel stood there, every instinct screaming to walk away. After everything that man had done to her, to them, it would have been easy. But Clara's voice echoed in his mind, sometimes, people break more than just things. So he helped him. He pulled the man from the wreck, carried him into the shop, and called for help. When the ambulance took him away, Clara stood at the door, tears streaming down her face. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. That night, when she whispered, "I could use a strong hand," she didn't mean someone to fight her battles, she meant someone strong enough to choose mercy when the world demanded hate. In the weeks that followed, Clara visited the hospital once. Not to forgive him, not to forget, but to close the door for good. When she came back, she found Daniel by the same workbench where it all began. He looked at her and smiled faintly. "The shop's doing all right," he said. She nodded, stepped closer, and for the first time, took his hand. "So am I," she whispered. The rain returned that evening, but this time, it sounded different. Softer. Almost like a song. Life didn't hand them miracles. They still struggled, argued, and carried scars. But they learned that sometimes, a strong hand isn't one that builds walls, it's one that reaches out when everything else falls apart. Daniel never forgot the night she walked in, drenched and trembling. And Clara never forgot the man who didn't look away. Years later, when people passed by the small auto shop at the corner of Willow Street, they often saw the two of them, side by side, covered in grease and laughter, fixing broken things together. The old sign above the door still read, "Harris and Son." But someone had painted small letters beneath it, barely visible unless you stood close. It read, "And the ones we saved." Sometimes, life doesn't give second chances, it gives people who are second chances. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that kindness and courage can still change the course of a life, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us tell more stories that remind the world what love and compassion can do. Speech balloon special request, comment below and tell us, what does a strong hand mean to you? Is it someone who saves, or someone who simply stays? Because sometimes, all it takes is one whisper, one act of quiet strength, to turn a broken life into something whole again.